Security pulled black woman off plane. Then she pulled $4 in funding from the airline. Picture a crowded airplane cabin, buzzing with the usual hum of conversation and the soft whir of overhead vents. Suddenly, raised voices pierce the atmosphere, flight attendants barking orders, a passenger protesting in disbelief, and fellow travelers staring wide-eyed with phones in hand. In a matter of moments, a black woman is forcibly removed from the flight. Outrage floods the internet, but beneath the clickbait headlines lies a tale that would shake the entire aviation industry. Little did the airline know, they had just crossed the wrong passenger. What happened next would cost them $4 billion and change the fate of everyone involved. Cassandra Cassie Malone was used to long flights. She spent her life crisscrossing the globe for business meetings, speaking engagements, and philanthropic projects. As a high-ranking executive at Morgan Stanley in New York City, Cassie had the ear of influential leaders across industries. She was brilliant, level-headed, and known for her cool professionalism. Her tall, graceful stature and resonant voice commanded attention in any room she entered. Beyond her corporate acumen, she also led diversity and inclusion initiatives, championing fair treatment for marginalized communities. On the day our story begins, Cassie was booked on Global Skies Flight 2783 from Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, to New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport, JFK. The flight was routine enough. 6 hours in the air, a quick nap, maybe some in-flight reading, and the promise of returning to her fiancé, who was awaiting her in Manhattan. But there was a sliver of excitement in the air. She had just concluded successful negotiations with a consortium of tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley who were keen to partner on a multi-billion-dollar investment. If all went well, Cassie would finalize these enormous deals within the next few days. As she boarded the plane, she offered a friendly smile to the flight attendants. She was dressed in a crisp, tailored pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a neat chignon, and she had the easy confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Every seat was taken, the flight was completely sold out. Still, the cabin had the usual subdued chaos, passengers searching overhead bins for space, parents shushing cranky children, flight attendants scanning tickets for any last-minute seat adjustments. Cassie made her way to her assigned seat in business class, near the window where she could enjoy her customary view of the clouds. She settled in and placed her laptop bag under the seat. Across the aisle, she noticed a curious gaze from an older passenger in a tweed jacket. He offered a polite nod, and Cassie smiled back, then turned her attention to her phone. She composed a quick text to her fiancé, letting him know she was taking off soon. Little did she know, that would be the last moment of normalcy she would experience for the foreseeable future. Just as Cassie was about to power down her phone, one of the flight attendants, a woman named Angela Donovan, someone Cassie would later remember all too vividly, stopped at Cassie's row. Angela forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Monsieur M, may I see your boarding pass, please?" Angela asked. Cassie looked up, slightly puzzled. It was not unusual for flight attendants to do a quick verification, especially if there was a question about seating. Cassie handed over her boarding pass without hesitation. Angela studied it and frowned. "It looks like you're in the correct seat. I just wanted to make sure. Excuse me," she said curtly, handing the boarding pass back. Confused, Cassie tucked the boarding pass into the seat pocket. She wondered if perhaps there was some mix-up, but everything seemed in order. She shrugged it off as an odd moment. Maybe Angela was just having a tough day. In her own experience, maintaining composure was everything in high-pressure situations. However, that fleeting exchange sent a strange ripple through Cassie's mood. Something felt off, but she couldn't quite name it yet. Moments later, Cassie caught Angela talking with another flight attendant, a few rows down, both glancing her way. Cassie tried to ignore it. Her mother always taught her that sometimes people stare, but there was no reason to assume the worst. She slipped on her noise-cancelling headphones and prepared for a long flight, hoping the drama, if there was any, would evaporate before takeoff. Unfortunately, drama has a way of growing when left unchecked. Several minutes later, Angela approached again, this time accompanied by a male flight attendant named Hector. He wore a concerned expression, but also looked somewhat uncertain, as if unsure why he'd been summoned. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remove your items from this seat," Angela said, pointing to the overhead bin, where Cassie's rolling suitcase was stowed. "We have another passenger who needs that bin space." Cassie took off her headphones. "My belongings are within the allotted carry-on size, and I was one of the first in the cabin. Is there an issue?" "Yes, there's an issue," Angela snapped. "I've told you we need that bin." Cassie blinked. It was rare to hear such an abrupt tone from cabin crew, especially in business class. She fought to keep her own composure. "I'm sorry, but the overhead bin directly above my seat should be available for my use, unless there's an airline rule stating otherwise." Angela's patience or facade thereof wore thin. "Are you refusing to follow a crew member's instruction, ma'am?" Cassie's heart rate picked up. She took a breath, reminding herself not to escalate. "I'm not refusing. I'm just trying to understand. It's unusual to have to move my luggage if I'm seated right here." At that point, Hector stepped in, gently placing a hand on Angela's arm. "Let's see if there's another spot. MAAM, we can try moving your bag to the next bin. Would that be acceptable?" Cassie nodded, relieved that Hector seemed more level-headed. "Yes, if there's space in an overhead bin close by, I'm fine with that." Hector managed to move her luggage just one row ahead, which was acceptable. Angela, however, marched away in a huff. There was an unspoken tension that lingered like the stale air in the cabin. Cassie tried to shake it off, focusing on the fact that minor irritations happen on flights every day. Yet a part of her wondered if there was something more to it. Why single her out? Why the aggressive tone? Her seatmates exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. The flight was set to take off soon, and Cassie simply wanted to get home without further ado. About 15 minutes after that incident, a trembling older woman walked to the front of the business class cabin, pressing the flight attendant call button. Angela was the one to respond. In hushed tones, the older woman gestured back toward Cassie's row, her face anxious. Cassie couldn't hear them, but she saw them glance her way. Her heart sank. Was there another complaint involving her somehow? When Angela returned, she had a stern expression. "Ma'am, I've received information that you are threatening another passenger. We take these matters very seriously." Cassie's eyes widened in shock. "What? I haven't spoken to anyone, let alone threatened them. Who said I threatened them?" Angela folded her arms. "The passenger over there. She claims you said something to her about regretting taking up space in business class." Heat rose in Cassie's cheeks. She gripped the armrests, trying not to let anger take over. "I did not say a single word to that woman. This is absurd." Another flight attendant, noticing the tension, came up to intervene, but Angela waved her off. It was as if Angela had taken personal offense and was on a mission to prove something. Passengers started turning their heads, picking up on the conflict. Some reached for phones, anticipating a potential scene. Angela took a step closer. "I'm telling you right now, if this behavior continues, we'll have you removed from the flight." Cassie felt like she'd just been doused in ice-cold water. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I haven't done anything. I haven't spoken to that passenger. There seems to be a misunderstanding. Could we please clarify this in a calm manner?" The older passenger who had complained shrank away when Cassie tried to catch her eye, looking guilty and frightened. Was this a case of mistaken identity? Or something more sinister? All Cassie knew was she was being accused of threatening someone she'd never even interacted with. This was the moment that would set into motion a chain of events no one could stop. The plane was still at the gate, boarding complete, but not yet pushed back. Angela, as the lead flight attendant, had the authority to make quick decisions about passenger safety and comfort. Cassie recognized that if she pushed back too hard, she might indeed be removed from the plane. And the irony was not lost on her. As a black woman in a high-stakes corporate position, she was painfully aware of how quickly a situation could be twisted and used against her. She decided to remain calm and request a formal conversation with the cabin manager or the captain. "I respectfully ask that we involve the captain or your supervising attendant so we can clear this up," Cassie said. Her voice remained steady, but inside, her nerves crackled. Angela rolled her eyes. "Oh, you want the captain, do you?" She snorted as if Cassie had demanded a private jet. "Fine. Let me see if the captain has time for your conversation. But if he decides you're a disruption, I promise you won't be on this plane when it leaves." Passengers around them looked on in shock. Some quietly murmured that they had never seen a flight attendant speak so unprofessionally. Others simply tried to disappear into their seats, not wanting any trouble. After a tense few minutes, a man in a pilot's uniform, Captain Brian F. Lockhart, approached from the cockpit. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and an air of authority. He asked Cassie in a measured tone, "Monsieur A.M., there have been multiple reports that you are making some of our passengers uncomfortable. Could you please give me your account of what's happening?" Cassie spoke concisely, ensuring every word was clear and calm. She explained the overhead bin incident, Angela's hostility, and the false accusation from the passenger she hadn't even spoken to. She also pointed out how she was more than willing to comply with any rules, but simply wanted a fair hearing. Captain Lockhart listened attentively, then turned to Angela for her version. She repeated the complaint that Cassie had threatened a passenger. At no point did Angela offer any actual evidence, nor did she seem open to verifying the story with anyone else. The older passenger who had complained was conspicuously silent, unwilling to step forward and clarify. In that moment, a fleeting look of doubt crossed Captain Lockhart's features. He seemed to sense that the story was lopsided, yet he also had to trust his lead flight attendant's judgment, especially under the pressure of an on-time departure. After a deliberative pause, he said, "MAM, I'm going to ask you to please step off the plane. We can continue this discussion at the gate. If we can resolve it quickly, we may still be able to get you on your scheduled flight." Cassie's heart pounded in her chest. She recognized this as a potentially life-altering situation. She considered her options: comply and hope for fairness, or refuse and risk an even bigger confrontation. Ultimately, she rose from her seat, picking up her laptop bag with trembling hands. "All right," she said quietly, "but please know I'm leaving under protest. I believe there's a misunderstanding here, and I'd like it addressed promptly." She looked around, noticing the sympathetic glances from some nearby passengers, though no one spoke up on her behalf. In such a charged environment, many people simply want to avoid involvement. With that, Cassie exited the plane, accompanied by the captain and Angela. The airline staff at the gate glanced over in concern, sensing trouble but not sure what had transpired. They watched as Cassie was pulled into a side conversation. Her fate for that flight and beyond was hanging by a thread. Cassie found herself standing at the gate counter, face to face with a gate agent named Daniel Roberts. He was polite, but clearly flustered by the sudden disruption. The captain had returned to the cockpit, citing a tight departure schedule. Angela, however, hovered nearby, arms folded. Daniel cleared his throat. "Miss Malone, the first understand there's been an incident. We'll do what we can to accommodate you on another flight, if that becomes necessary." Cassie mustered every ounce of composure she had. "I still don't understand why I'm being forced off my seat. I did nothing wrong." Angela butted in. "You threatened a passenger. That's something wrong." Inwardly, Cassie seethed. Outwardly, she kept her cool. Again, that's an unfounded accusation. No one has produced any evidence or credible witness. Why are we escalating this before verifying facts? Daniel looked at Angela as if hoping for a more coherent explanation. Angela shrugged. She's disruptive. That's enough reason under FAA guidelines to remove her. Cassie let out a bitter laugh. So basically, because you say I'm disruptive, that's that. Is this standard Global Skies procedure? Daniel tried to smooth things over. Miss Malone, we can rebook you on a flight that leaves in a few hours. Or if you prefer, we can offer a voucher for your inconvenience. I'm sure we can work this out. Cassie was on the verge of tears, not because of self-pity, but from sheer frustration and anger. She had pressing business in New York, and more importantly, she had just been humiliated publicly. The whispers of onlooking passengers stung her ears. Yet she knew turning this moment into a shouting match would only reinforce negative stereotypes. She nodded stiffly. Fine, I'll wait for the next flight, but I'd like a written report of this incident. Daniel hesitated. I can't produce an official incident report on the spot, but I'll make a note in the system. You can file a complaint with our customer relations department. Cassie realized this was turning into a bureaucratic dead end. She glanced around the terminal. Some people were recording with their phones. She overheard one passenger say, "This is insane." She wasn't even doing anything, but none of the bystanders stepped forward officially. It was an all too familiar situation. A black woman singled out, quickly judged, and offered little recourse. With a heavy sigh, Cassie agreed to be rebooked. She walked away from the gate, feeling the weight of humiliation on her shoulders. Little did Global Skies realize they had just handled a VIP in the worst possible way. And the cost of their mistake would soon become evident, not just in public outcry, but on a far greater financial scale than they could ever imagine. Cassie found a quiet corner near a row of windows overlooking the runway. She wanted to scream, to cry, to make furious phone calls, but she also knew that emotional outbursts could overshadow the real issue. She'd spent years advocating for fair treatment in corporate and public sectors. Now, ironically, she was living out the exact scenario she'd fought against. Her phone buzzed. A text from her fiancé, Marcus. "Hope you're in the air. Miss you already." Cassie closed her eyes and steadied her breathing, forcing down the lump in her throat. She typed a quick reply, "Flight delayed. We'll call soon." A moment later, her phone rang. It was Cynthia Caldwell, a high-profile venture capitalist and longtime friend who had introduced Cassie to several global development projects. Cassie had planned to meet Cynthia in New York to finalize details on a new venture that involved, of all things, potentially investing in advanced fuel technologies, part of which was being pitched to major airlines for sustainable aviation. Morgan Stanley was leading the financing, but Cassie was a crucial liaison. "Hey, Cass, are you en route?" Cynthia asked cheerily. "I'm already in Manhattan. The board meeting is tomorrow morning, bright and early." Cassie swallowed her pride and told Cynthia everything, how she was taken off the plane, the false accusations, the humiliating scene at LAX. "Oh, my God," Cynthia said, her voice quivering with anger. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. Are you okay?" Cassie took a shaky breath. "I will be, but it's such a blatant case of racial profiling. I can't ignore this. I have to address it, not just for me, but for everyone who faces this nonsense." Cynthia was silent for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Cass, you know we're discussing that massive deal tomorrow where Morgan Stanley and a conglomerate of funds are set to invest billions in airline innovations. Global Skies was in the final running for a big portion of that partnership. Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" A slow, measured determination settled in Cassie's chest. "I am. And if I have anything to say about it, Global Skies might lose a substantial piece of that pie." Cynthia exhaled. "We have that power, Cassie. Between our private equity group, the institutional investors, and the philanthropic arms. We can pivot funding. With your influence and connections, you could single-handedly sway the vote. I can't believe they just did this to the wrong person. Cassie felt a surge of cold fury. I don't want to do anything rash, but they need to be held accountable. This is more than just a personal grudge. It's about sending a message that such discrimination has real consequences. Exactly. Take a moment. Collect yourself. We'll talk more when you get here. Cynthia paused. And Cass, whatever you decide, I'll back you up 100%. This is unacceptable. They ended the call, and Cassie felt a swirl of emotions, anger, resolve, a flicker of vindication. Her rational mind told her that sometimes cooler heads must prevail. But the part of her that had spent years being the only black woman in the room, the part that had fought tooth and nail for the respect and dignity of marginalized voices, knew that this was the line in the sand. Global Skies needed to understand that behind the suits and boards, real human stories exist. Their prejudice would cost them, perhaps more dearly than they could imagine. As Cassie waited for her rebooked flight, she scrolled through social media. Word was already spreading. Some onlookers had posted videos of her being escorted from the plane. The captions ranged from neutral observations: passenger asked to leave Global Skies flight, claims no wrongdoing, to outraged condemnations: black woman kicked off flight for no reason, racism. The footage showed her calmly walking out while Angela stood by, looking triumphant. Her phone buzzed non-stop with texts from friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances who recognized her from the video. She typed a measured statement on her own social media profile. I was forcibly removed from a Global Skies flight at LAX today after being falsely accused of threatening another passenger. I have spent my career championing inclusivity. Ironically, I was subjected to discriminatory treatment. Full details forthcoming. Let's work towards equity in all spaces. It was a brief statement, enough to clarify her stance without fanning the flames of gossip, but social media has a way of spinning even the simplest words into a viral storm. Within hours, her post had thousands of likes, shares, and supportive comments. People from different backgrounds rallied to her side. She noticed a pattern. Many recounted similar experiences of feeling targeted on flights, singled out by flight attendants, or confronted by suspicious passengers. Cassie took screenshots and saved links, building a dossier of public sentiment. She wanted to be prepared. This wasn't just about personal revenge. It was about forcing systemic change. Yet she couldn't deny the sense of personal betrayal she felt. She had flown Global Skies many times without issue, though she'd heard rumors of discriminatory incidents. Now, she was living it firsthand. At last, Cassie's rebooked flight was ready for boarding. The airline placed her in first class as a courtesy, which felt like a hollow gesture, but she accepted it anyway. She recognized a few other passengers from the earlier flight, now also rebooked because of mechanical delays on the original aircraft. Among them was the older man in the tweed jacket she'd noticed before. As they lined up, he introduced himself as Peter Caldwell, no relation to Cynthia, but a retired school principal from Pittsburgh. He gave her a warm, sympathetic smile. I saw what happened earlier, Miss Malone, he said softly. It was disgraceful. If you need a witness, I'd be more than happy to speak on your behalf. I was just across the aisle from you, and you certainly didn't threaten anyone. Cassie felt a wave of gratitude. Thank you so much, Mr. Caldwell. I really appreciate that. Honestly, hearing that someone else saw what happened means a lot. He nodded. I'm old enough to remember the civil rights era. I can't stand by and watch people being mistreated. Here's my card. Don't hesitate to get in touch. They parted ways as they found their respective seats. Cassie felt a bit lighter, knowing that at least someone was willing to stand up for her. For all the bystanders who remained silent, there were also those who would quietly come forward. Cassie landed at JFK well past midnight. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also charged with a sense of purpose. Marcus greeted her at baggage claim, his face etched with concern. She fell into his arms, and for a moment, the tension of the past several hours melted away. "I've been following everything on social media," he murmured. "I'm sorry, Cass. That was terrible." She nodded, tears threatening to spill. "It was. But I'm focusing on what I can do to make this right. There's a big meeting tomorrow. It could change everything." They drove home in relative silence, save for Cassie outlining the crucial details for Marcus, so he'd understand the gravity of what might unfold the next morning. She barely slept that night, replaying the events in her mind and drafting potential strategies. By dawn, she'd formulated a plan to bring Global Sky's racist conduct to the attention of the powerful figures set to make multi-billion-dollar investment decisions. The next morning, Cassie arrived at the Morgan Stanley boardroom bright and early, accompanied by Cynthia and a small team of legal and financial advisors. Among the attendees were representatives from major investment funds, philanthropic organizations, and technology companies. The subject, a planned $10 billion injection into next-generation aviation technology. Global Skies was one of 3 airlines under consideration for a massive $4 billion stake, which would fund new fuel-efficient planes, better passenger amenities, and advanced pilot training programs. The room was a who's who of power brokers, CEOs, CFOs, vice presidents, and legal counsel, all ready to hammer out deals that would shape the aviation industry for decades. Cassie, as the lead on Morgan Stanley's side, was poised to guide the final decision. What had been a straightforward financial arrangement was now tangled with moral and ethical implications. Cassie had the power to influence these decisions significantly, and she knew it. After the initial pleasantries and a review of the investment agenda, the discussion shifted to the airlines. A representative for Global Skies extolled the company's forward-thinking approach, its commitment to diversity, and its desire to be a global leader in sustainable aviation. Cassie sat through the presentation with a steely calm. When it was her turn to speak, she glanced at Cynthia. A subtle nod passed between them. They'd rehearsed this moment, but the emotional reality was hitting Cassie harder than she'd anticipated. "Thank you for the presentation," Cassie began, her voice resonant in the hushed boardroom. "I'd like to discuss some recent concerns that have come to light regarding Global Skies." She explained, succinctly, that she had personally experienced an incident of what appeared to be racial discrimination at LAX just the previous day. In even tones, she recounted being falsely accused, humiliated, and removed from a plane without due process. She underscored how this wasn't just about her feelings or a personal vendetta, but about what it signified regarding Global Sky's corporate culture and approach to customer care. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. Some participants looked shocked, others seemed uneasy, flipping through notes or checking their phones. One of the Global Skies executives, present via video conference, stuttered a response. "Miss Malone, we at Global Skies are extremely sorry to hear about your experience. This is the first we're hearing of it, and we assure you we take such allegations very seriously. We have a strict, non-discrimination policy." Cassie met his gaze squarely, even through the screen. "I appreciate that you have a written policy. However, the reality on the ground and in the air may differ from the policy statements. This event is all over social media now, and it's triggered many other passengers to share similar stories. So, before we make any decisions about a $4 billion investment in Global Skies, I believe it's critical that this board fully understands the implications." An uncomfortable silence filled the room. The Global Skies executive tried to pivot the discussion back to the airline's merits, but it was clear the mood had soured. Cassie, with support from Cynthia and others, called for an investigation period, delaying any final decision on awarding the airline their portion of the funding. Let's propose a formal inquiry into Global Sky's treatment of passengers, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, Cassie suggested. I'd also recommend an external audit of customer complaints over the past few years to see if there's a pattern. A representative from a large pension fund who had been leaning toward supporting Global Skies looked visibly conflicted. We need to ensure our investments align with our values, he said quietly. If these allegations hold true, it could expose us to significant brand and financial risks. We can't proceed without clarity. The meeting ended with an agreement to place the Global Skies investment on hold pending the investigation. The company's other prospective deals were also thrown into question as word rapidly spread through corporate circles. Global Skies had come under intense scrutiny in the past for smaller-scale incidents, but nothing had ever gained this level of attention so swiftly. Cynthia pulled Cassie aside as the group dispersed. "You did it, Cass. You put them on notice. No one can just sweep this under the rug now," Cassie exhaled, her shoulders trembling with relief and residual stress. "This is only the beginning, Sin. Global Skies might fight back, claim they're being unfairly targeted, but at least the wheels are in motion." They both understood that corporate behemoths rarely change course without a strong push. And Cassie had just delivered that push with a sledgehammer. Back at Global Skies headquarters, chaos ensued. The CEO, Frederick H. Dawson, convened an emergency meeting with his top executives, PR strategists, and legal advisors. The email subject lines read like alarm bells. Immediate PR crisis, discrimination allegations, $4 investment at risk, social media backlash. Angela Donovan's name came up as the lead flight attendant in the incident. Quickly, the airline's attorneys began dissecting her employee records, searching for any prior complaints. The PR team scrambled to draft a statement emphasizing Global Sky's commitment to equality and promising a thorough internal review. But no matter how they spun it, the story was a PR nightmare. A respected black female executive, forcibly removed from a flight, had the power to freeze billions of dollars in potential investments. Frederick rubbed his temples. "We have to reach out to Miss Malone directly and resolve this. The board can't let this slip any further." Our stock took a hit as soon as the news broke. He delegated a senior executive, Meredith Shaw, to handle the crisis communication. Meredith had a reputation for being a tough negotiator, with a polished demeanor, an ideal figure to try smoothing over humiliating public disasters. Cassie was in her Manhattan office reviewing emails when she received a call from Meredith Shaw. She recognized the voice from previous interactions with Global Skies, when everything was cordial and businesslike. This time, Meredith's tone was tinged with urgency. "Miss Maloney, this is Meredith Shaw, Senior Vice President at Global Skies. We've become aware of the unfortunate incident you faced, and on behalf of the airline, I want to express our sincere apologies. We value your patronage and your leadership in the corporate world. We'd like to request a private meeting to address this matter directly." Cassie let the words hang in the air for a beat. "I'm open to discussing it," she said cautiously, "but I need to be clear, I'm not interested in superficial apologies. There needs to be a thorough investigation, real accountability, and, if necessary, policy changes." Meredith's voice tightened, though she tried to maintain a professional warmth. "I understand. We're prepared to do whatever it takes to ensure your confidence in Global Skies remains strong. Perhaps we can host you at our corporate office, or we could meet at your convenience." "I'll see if I can fit you in," Cassie replied. She ended the call with a polite but firm tone that signaled she was not in a forgiving mood. After hanging up, Cassie leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. Part of her longed to get direct apologies from Angela Donovan, the flight attendant who had humiliated her. But she also knew that true accountability would require more than a single staff member's apology. This was about systemic issues, training, enforcement of anti-discrimination policies, and the attitude from top-level management down to the frontline employees. In the days that followed, the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack began trending on social media. Cassie's story triggered a wave of similar anecdotes from black travelers who recounted incidents of unfair treatment, whether it was being over-scrutinized at check-in, singled out for bag checks, or unfairly threatened with removal for trivial reasons. Major news outlets picked up the story. Cassie found herself fielding interviews from CNN, MSNBC, and even international media. Each time, she maintained that this wasn't just about her personal experience. It was a reflection of a broader societal pattern that needed to be addressed. The more she spoke, the more testimonies flooded in. It painted a grim picture of how far the travel industry still had to go in terms of genuine inclusivity. While Cassie's personal brand soared, she was lauded for her courage and integrity. Global Skies saw its reputation tarnished. Stock prices dipped, and some major institutional investors froze or re-evaluated their positions. Meanwhile, Morgan Stanley made no moves to reassure Global Skies that the $4 billion investment was secure. The corporate giant was effectively in limbo, waiting for a redemption arc that might never come. About a week after the incident, Cassie agreed to meet Meredith Shaw at a high-end restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. The setting was opulent and discreet, with private booths that shielded business conversations from prying ears. Meredith arrived first, impeccably dressed, projecting confidence despite the crisis. When Cassie entered, Meredith stood, extending a warm handshake, but Cassie could sense the tension in her posture. "Miss Malone, thank you for meeting with me," Meredith said. "I'll get right to the point. Global Skies deeply regrets how you were treated. We can't undo the past, but we're fully committed to rectifying the situation and preventing such incidents from happening again." Cassie nodded, her gaze steady. "I need specifics, Miss Shaw. Vague promises won't suffice. Are you willing to fire the individuals responsible, institute new training programs, publicly acknowledge the airline's shortcomings?" Meredith drew a quick breath. "We've already taken initial steps. The flight attendant in question, Angela Donovan, has been placed on unpaid leave pending a thorough investigation. We're also reviewing all existing training programs, and we plan to partner with a leading diversity consultancy to overhaul our approach to customer interactions." Cassie let her eyes narrow slightly. "And what about your policy for removing passengers? Will there be changes to ensure that baseless accusations don't lead to humiliating scenarios like the one I experienced?" Meredith shifted in her seat, clasping her hands together. "Yes, we're exploring policy revisions that require more substantial evidence before removing a passenger. We're also implementing body cameras for flight attendants in certain situations to provide an objective record." Cassie raised an eyebrow. "Body cameras on flight attendants? That's a bold move. If implemented properly, it could protect both passengers and crew from false claims." Meredith nodded. "Exactly. We're also prepared to offer you a personal apology from our CEO, as well as financial compensation for your ordeal and a donation to a charity of your choice in your name." Cassie remained silent for a moment, weighing the offer. "While I appreciate the gesture, this isn't about money for me. It's about meaningful change. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that these measures are sincere. I need to see them in writing, along with a public statement acknowledging the airline's responsibility." Meredith paused, then nodded. "We're willing to do that, Miss Malone. The airline wants to move forward positively. This has been a wake-up call for us. We hope you'll see that we're serious." They ended the meeting with a handshake, both recognizing it was an initial step in a much longer journey. Still, as Cassie departed, she couldn't help but feel that the real test would be whether Global Skies followed through. Words were cheap, only actions would truly matter. During this period, a journalist from the New York Times contacted Cassie, requesting an in-depth interview. The journalist had also managed to track down Angela Donovan. While Angela declined to appear on camera, she offered a written statement claiming that she felt threatened by Cassie's demeanor and believed Cassie's body language signaled aggression. Reading Angela's statement in the Times article made Cassie's blood boil all over again. It was a textbook example of how black women are often stereotyped as aggressive or intimidating simply by virtue of existing. Angela's words laid bare the unconscious bias that had fueled the altercation. Cassie responded calmly in the article, pointing out that feeling threatened is not a legitimate excuse without specific actions or words to justify it. She reiterated that she had complied with all requests and that the supposed threat was never described in any concrete terms. Public opinion remained strongly in Cassie's favor. Angela's statement was widely criticized, and the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack continued to trend. Meanwhile, a petition demanding that Global Skies issue a formal apology and fire Angela racked up over 500,000 signatures. A month after the incident, the postponed meeting to decide on the $4 billion investment was reconvened at Morgan Stanley. By this point, Global Skies had made strides to quell the controversy. They'd released an updated passenger removal policy, launched new diversity training programs, and publicly apologized to Cassie. They also offered her a seat on a newly formed advisory council for inclusive travel initiatives. Cassie was still weighing whether to accept. As the meeting commenced, Global Skies made one final pitch, showcasing their changes and recommitting to improving passenger experience across the board. Cassie listened intently, her expression revealing nothing. The fate of the airline's multi-billion-dollar request would be decided by vote. Still, Cassie's voice carried extraordinary weight in shaping how the institutional investors viewed Global Skies' readiness to implement real changes. When it was time to deliberate, Cassie cleared her throat and spoke. "Over the past month, we've witnessed how quickly reputations can be damaged when companies fail to act with integrity. Global Skies has taken some positive steps. However, trust is not earned overnight. I recommend we allocate a portion of the investment to Global Skies, contingent upon them meeting specific benchmarks related to diversity training, improved passenger relations, and transparent reporting of all passenger complaints." She outlined a proposed 3-year plan that would tie funding releases to performance metrics, ensuring that Global Skies would be held accountable for the pledges they had made. The room was quiet, then a wave of nods and agreement spread among the board members. It was a balanced approach. Global Skies wouldn't be cut off entirely, but they would have to earn the full funding by proving their commitment to the new policies. By a wide margin, the board voted in favor of Cassie's proposal. Global Skies would initially receive $2 billion, with the remaining $2 billion contingent upon successful completion of the outlined reforms and oversight by an independent body. It was a compromise that underscored Cassie's integrity. She didn't want to destroy the airline. She wanted to ensure they did better. Global Skies' executives breathed a cautious sigh of relief. They'd been spared total financial ruin. However, the conditions attached to the remaining $2 billion meant they couldn't simply pat themselves on the back and go back to business as usual. They now had to maintain an ongoing process of policy reviews, staff evaluations, and public transparency. But karma has a way of biting harder than expected. Soon after this agreement was signed, the airline faced a string of new controversies, delayed flights, more passenger complaints, and even a pilot walkout over labor disputes. Social media again erupted, and the general sentiment was that Global Skies, for all its new promises, still had a lot of work to do. Their brand image took repeated hits, stock prices seesawed, and internal morale plummeted. As for Angela Donovan, she was ultimately dismissed from her position after the internal investigation discovered a pattern of similar complaints. Global Skies tried to keep the details private, but word leaked out, intensifying calls for more systemic reforms. Throughout this ordeal, Cassie found herself in a whirlwind of public attention. Her name became synonymous with holding corporations accountable. She was invited to speak at conferences, to advise on policy for multiple airlines, and even to consult with government agencies on aviation regulations. Her life had changed dramatically in a matter of weeks. What began as a humiliating injustice turned into a platform for global advocacy. On a personal level, Cassie also felt a renewed sense of self-worth. She had faced racism in a very public way and refused to be silenced or made to shrink. She was prouder than ever of her identity, her resilience, and her community. Her experience resonated with countless others who'd faced discrimination in travel and beyond. Marcus, always supportive, reminded her to breathe, to rest when she could. Together, they planned a small wedding ceremony, with jokes that maybe they'd better avoid flying Global Skies for the honeymoon. Cassie laughed, though she made a mental note that real change takes time and she might not yet trust Global Skies for a personal flight. But she never forgot the importance of her role, to keep them honest, to ensure they stayed on the path of transformation or risk losing the rest of that $4 billion. Despite securing the partial investment, Global Skies discovered that Cassie's new terms effectively put their entire corporate structure under a microscope. Missed deadlines or subpar improvements could lead to withheld funds, money they desperately needed to modernize their fleet and stay competitive. Within the airline, finger-pointing became rampant. Executives who had once praised Angela Donovan's firm handling of unruly passengers now condemned her actions. They blamed middle management for not implementing better training sooner. Morale sunk, with employees fearing the next shoe to drop. Some of the airline's biggest corporate clients quietly shifted a portion of their travel contracts to competitors. It became clear that the brand was severely tainted. Meanwhile, Cassie's revelations had prompted consumer watchdog groups to file class action lawsuits against Global Skies on behalf of minority passengers who had experienced discrimination. In multiple cities, protesters picketed outside Global Skies offices, demanding justice for past grievances. The airline's board realized too late just how catastrophic that one flight attendant's actions would be, combined with the complacent system that backed her up. Had they intervened with sincerity from day one, had Angela been properly trained or corrected, had management instituted fair and transparent policies, they might have avoided this downfall. But karma had arrived in full force. Their entire business model was on shaky ground, and the final $2 billion off Cassie's deal remained just out of reach, conditional upon proving they could truly transform. Months rolled into a year, and Global Skies scrambled to meet each performance benchmark. They launched new staff training modules with an external consultant, updated the passenger removal policy, and hired a diverse panel of advisors to oversee day-to-day operations. Their PR team worked overtime to rehabilitate the brand image, It was costly, labor-intensive, and sometimes painful. Gradually, the airline began to see small improvements. Instances of passenger complaints decreased. Employee satisfaction ticked up slightly as new leadership took over human resources. Over time, they clawed back some lost market share, but the process was slow and fraught with setbacks. Cassie watched these developments with a measured hope. She'd never intended to destroy Global Skies, only to demand accountability. Watching them struggle was a testament to how deeply ingrained bias and poor leadership practices could damage a corporate entity. Yet she also recognized that real change was possible if the will existed. By the time Global Skies hit all their performance milestones just barely, and 2 months behind schedule, they were eligible to receive the remaining $2 billion. But the board made it clear any future controversies of a similar nature would nullify the arrangement, effectively bankrupting the airline. That sword of Damocles hung over Global Skies, serving as a potent reminder of how quickly a once mighty brand could fall. For Cassie, life after the ordeal felt strangely new. She had long been an advocate for equity and justice, but now her voice resonated worldwide. She found herself at the center of important policy discussions, not just for aviation, but for corporate best practices across industries. She spearheaded a Morgan Stanley initiative to address unconscious bias in Fortune 500 companies, forging alliances with civil rights organizations and lobbying groups. She also received numerous awards from social justice and professional organizations, some praising her bravery, others recognizing her leadership in leveraging financial leverage to produce social good. Despite the accolades, she never forgot the day she was forced off a plane at LAX. Singled out and humiliated, that pain remained a driving force behind her work. On a more personal note, she finally married Marcus in a beautiful ceremony in the rolling hills of Napa Valley. They'd chosen a venue they could reach by car to avoid the complexity of commercial flights. Surrounded by friends, family, and professional allies, Cassie stood radiant in her wedding gown, the weight of her experience lending her a new grace and confidence. During her vows, she looked into Marcus's eyes and saw a future that transcended adversity, where each challenge could be transformed into an opportunity for growth, awareness, and justice. That moment was more than a personal victory. It was a beacon of hope for everyone who'd followed her story from the day she was wrongfully removed from a Global Skies airplane. A year and a half after the incident, Cassie found herself boarding a flight once more, this time, ironically, a Global Skies plane. She had been invited to attend a major industry summit in Tokyo, part of an ongoing international effort to standardize anti-discrimination policies in air travel. Though the memory of her removal still stung, she believed in giving second chances when genuine reform seemed to be happening. As she stepped onto the aircraft, a young black flight attendant with a bright smile greeted her. "Welcome aboard, Miss Malone. We are honored to have you. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask." Cassie smiled back, seeing in that moment the potential for real change. She found her seat comfortably in business class again and stowed her luggage in the overhead bin without issue. Settling into her seat, she felt a wave of emotions, a touch of lingering anxiety, a glimmer of pride, and above all, a sense of responsibility. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a catalyst who had redefined what corporate accountability could look like. The engines roared as the plane began its taxi. Cassie stared out the window, watching the airport lights blend into streaming lines of color. In the hush before takeoff, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, a journey of pain, discovery, and transformation. The flight lifted off, carrying her not only across oceans, but toward a future she had helped shape, one where a single injustice could spark global change, and where the consequences of prejudice cost more than anyone dared to imagine. History has shown that standing up to injustice can transform a personal nightmare into a far-reaching movement. Cassandra Malone's story isn't just about one humiliating moment on a plane. It's about wielding the power of accountability to drive real corporate change. It's about proving that profit and principles are not mutually exclusive, and that the very structures enforcing discrimination can be compelled to reform when faced with financial consequences. In a world where countless people endure silent indignities every day, Cassie's voice reminds us that change happens when individuals refuse to stay silent. If her story moved or inspired you, take a moment to share it. Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to this channel. Every click and comment amplifies the demand for fairness and respect. Together, let's keep building a world where everyone's seat is safe and no one is removed unfairly from the journey toward justice.